Hello and welcome to Town Meeting Television and another in our live candidate debate forums. On this show, candidates for Vermont Auditor of Accounts. I'm Matt Kelly, your host, and I'm pleased to be joined on this program by Doug Hoffer, our current editor of accounts for the state of Vermont. Challenger Chris Erickson was unavailable for this interview. Our format for this show begins with an opening statement from our candidate. Then we'll enjoy some Q&A for about 15 minutes. This is an opportunity for you, the viewing audience, if you're watching this live on our YouTube channel, to dial in directly and ask a question of Doug. That number is 802-862-3966. Again, if you're watching live on our YouTube channel, the number to dial in and ask a question directly of Doug is 862-3966. Doug, welcome to the program. Thank you for your service to our great state and your willingness to continue to serve. Please begin our show with your opening statement about why you're running for re-election.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you to Channel 17 and your colleagues for the opportunity. I've been in office now for almost 8 years, which is even awkward to say, let alone think about. A long time. So some might say, what's the deal? What are you up to? Well, I like the work, quite frankly. I wouldn't have run back in 2010, the first time when I didn't win, if I didn't like the work. And for those who aren't familiar with the work of our office, we do performance auditing. We don't do financial or compliance auditing. That goes out to a contractor that does the audit of the state's financial statements and the federal single audit. We get to look at how effectively state government is operating, both internally as an organization and whether the programs that are created and paid for with your tax dollars are achieving the goals intended by the legislature. I'm a policy guy by trade for 25 years before I got elected. This is right up my alley. I enjoy this work, quite honestly. I work with a good group of people, and there's a lot more work to be done. So I'm looking forward to another term.
Very good, Doug. Thank you. A reminder, as we get into our Q&A portion of our interview here, again, if you're watching live on our YouTube channel, the number to dial in and ask a question of Doug is 862-3966. So, Doug, as you and I enjoy this one-on-one time here with Chris Erickson's absence, it's an opportunity for us to kind of engage in more or less of a discussion rather than a Q&A. And I would like for you to just kind of briefly describe what is the Auditor of Accounts' role in assuring that the citizens have an effective government?
Well, as I said, we do performance auditing, and there are basically two buckets. One is about the way the organization that is state government actually operates, the nuts and bolts. And while that wasn't my background and didn't seem as interesting or sexy as the other stuff, I've come to both appreciate its value and enjoy it to some extent. For example, we've done some work on the state's efforts to do contracting. As you would imagine, for the last 100 years, we've known that it's best to go out to bid. You don't want to just say, oh, let's just give it to Larry because I know Larry. There's a process and there's a reason for it. And we looked into that about 5 years ago and found that 42% of the state's contracts were sole source without a competitive bid process. The administration was a little embarrassed by that, and they said, we're going to take that seriously and make the changes. Those kinds of things are not programmatic, but to the extent we can help Vermonters gain trust in the way state government is run, I think they're more likely to listen to new ideas about how to achieve the broader goals of the legislature and the administration. So, and we play a role in that because we are completely independent. You had a question that you sent to me in advance about the 2-year cycle for elections. I think in some states, you may not know this, auditors are appointed by the legislature or the administration, and that may have value if you identify professionals that have a good reputation. But I think our model is much better. I don't much care for the 2-year cycle. That's a lot of work. But I think this office, whoever occupies this chair, should be independent. I don't work for the governor. I don't work for the legislature. Obviously, we try to work together. But I represent you and the viewers of this program and so forth. So it's great fun. I am a numbers guy. A lot of the work is numbers. Some of it is compliance. But there are a lot of questions that can't be answered. We don't have enough data. For example, you may know I've spent 25 years talking about economic development and whether those programs are successful. If I can't measure the outcome, if we don't know what the return on investment is, then maybe legislators should consider reallocating those funds to things that we can quantify. So that's just an overview briefly. But we have a very small shop. There's only 15. for the whole state.
Wow. So in essence, the auditor of accounts sort of serves as a check and a balance on the governor as well as the state itself and how it's running to just make sure that the processes that are enacted are in fact equal.
But it's both process and outcomes. The part that interests me most, given my experience professionally, is outcomes. But as I think process is very important as well. So we get to do both. And checks and balances, to some extent, yes, it's a fun job. You get to
And
but people should know that while we might have recommendations at the end of an audit to an agency or a department, we can't compel them to adopt our recommendations. We check a year out and 3 years out to see the extent to which they have adopted or implemented our recommendations, and we do pretty well.
And so from your viewpoint of being in this position now for, a number of years, can you give us sort of your state of the state, if you would? How are we doing in terms of our outcomes? Are we meeting our projected and hoped for goals in a number of the programs that we are enacting?
I think in many cases we are, but having said that, one can have a good conversation about the goals. For example, like every other state in this country and the federal government, we spend a significant amount of money on anti-poverty programs, and they are essential. And Vermont is one of the more generous states in America, and I'm proud of that. Having said that, we do keep people from falling through the so-called safety net in many cases. But over 50 or 60 years now in America, many of those programs have not resolved the problem of poverty. We're not creating wealth in a class of people who are low income, unemployed, and so forth. We are, in many cases, assisting with decent and affordable housing, food, insurance, and so forth. But are we standing back from that at 35,000 feet? Are we making progress? And the answer, sadly, is no. And I mention that because that's about 40% of state government. It's a big deal. Both Medicaid, housing assistance, and there's a whole bunch of programs. So while we can say that the efforts by state government on behalf of all of us in the assistance of these families is appropriate, compliant with the law, and it's making a difference day in, day out, I think from a 20-year perspective, we have a lot more work to do. The rest of it, the state runs pretty well. There are a lot of people, sadly, I think, from the Reagan years, when he famously said government is the problem, who are inclined to think that the government is incompetent and corrupt. And that's really not the case. There's an awful lot of really smart, hardworking people in state government. Does that mean we get everything right? Of course not. If that were the case, I wouldn't have a job, or my reports wouldn't be very interesting. But I think for the most part, state government does well. There are a lot of things we can rethink. For example, we did a job a few years ago quantifying what Vermont spends on public safety. I was curious about that, both state and local, and was shocked to learn that the figure at that time, this was 2017, was $574 million for public safety in a state with 630,000 people. Now, thankfully, we are comparatively safe by national standards. Nevertheless, I spoke to some people in the legislature who worked a lot on these issues and said, if you were to start with a blank slate, would you create a public safety system that looks like the one we have, which is local, sheriff, state police, the judiciary, defender general, all those pieces have to be included, but would it look like the one we have today? And I said, no. Now, you and I both know that when you have something where you're spending $574 million, there are undoubtedly redundancies and inefficiencies in that system. Unfortunately, the legislature has not jumped on that because for a lot of reasons. They don't have the resources, they're part-time, they put out fires as a rule instead of standing back big issues. But the state does the best it can. I think we can make improvements in some of these major areas. For sure.
And so, Doug, as you run for another term, another 2-year term, what do you see is your primary mission for the next 2 years? We're facing a lot of challenges. We're coming through COVID-19. There's a presidential election. There's a lot facing the state, some headwinds. as you might say. Can you try to nutshell them for us and what you see is the primary challenge facing the state and how the Auditor of Accounts is going to help meet that challenge?
Well, some of them are beyond the scope of my office, as you would imagine. For example, income inequality is a problem everywhere in the United States. The state auditor can't really do much about income inequality, sadly. Uh, but a big issue for us collectively, and now for me in my office, is healthcare. The latest data suggests that we've spent $6.2 billion on healthcare 3 years ago. 6.2 billion. And based on some research we've done, I think the Green Mountain Care Board can do a better job in a couple of ways. One, affordability. The statutes are very clear that when the board was created, one of their primary responsibilities was to help make the system more affordable. And I don't think that's happened. That's not entirely the board's fault. There's so many moving parts. It's a very complex and convoluted system. But to answer your question, healthcare is something we have started spending a lot of time on and will continue to do so as long as I'm in office. The other stuff that you're talking about, how to get beyond COVID, post-COVID, I think it's unfortunate, but with all the money that came into the state of Vermont, massive amount of money, and there's a piece in Digger today about that some people have already seen. It's over $4 billion. Obviously, there was a need to assist businesses, hospitals, and others who were adversely affected and needed immediate assistance. I'm not sure all the programs that the state created, the legislature, on a terrible time frame. Normally, if you're going to spend that kind of money, there's 6 very long and deep analysis of options. We didn't have that opportunity this time. In my view, they might not have spent all that money as effectively as they might have. Furthermore, it's a once in a generation opportunity to think about making significant changes in how we do things. They didn't do that either. Having said that, they did the best they could with the information they had. The money's getting out into the community as far as it goes. But we are going to be looking at some of those programs for one specific reason, and that is duplication. Was the double dipping? Federal law says if you get money from this pot, you're not supposed to get it from this pot. So we're looking at that, and also to the extent we can, whether the state performed adequate due diligence on identifying those who were genuinely in need, as opposed to those who just had to fill out the form.
Doug, we only have a few minutes left, so I did want to get to one specific question here about the EB5 scandal. The Auditor of Accounts, the office has been very involved in evaluating this whole controversy. There's a report soon to be released. What are the steps to make sure that this report gets out to the public and they completely understand it, as well as the legislature, to make sure that this type of controversy doesn't occur in the future?
A couple of things. First, we just released a report, which is effectively phase 1. It's as far as we can go right now. And it is in one place, a very detailed description of how it started, how we got here, and so forth, of the EB5 program itself. The question about that is outstanding, that a lot of people are interested in, and understandably so, is what role did the state play, if any, in ignoring or even participating in the fraud? And that piece we can't complete. We've already put in hundreds and hundreds of hours reading thousands of documents. But there's one thing we haven't been able to do, and that is interview those former state employees. They are being told by their attorneys, including the Attorney General, to hold off until the litigation is done. And the rules, not the rules, but the guidance about generally accepted government auditing standards say, if there's litigation, keep your hands off the deal until the litigation is done, then do your work. And that's what we've decided to do. And that's what I promised the Attorney General. We are ready to continue. We've done all of the preparatory work. It's done. The report is out. You can learn about EB5. But to the extent people want the answers to the questions posed now a long time ago, what did the Secretary of Administration know about this? What did the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce know? The governor and so forth. We're prepared to answer those questions, but you can't write the report if you haven't interviewed those people. And while I have subpoena power, and I could say to you, state official or former state official, you have to come to my office to be interviewed. That doesn't mean you've given up your Fifth Amendment rights. You could sit in my office and say, thanks for inviting me. Do you have any coffee? And they might not say anything. So we understood a year ago that most of these folks were happy to talk to us after the litigation is done. So I've told the Attorney General and the people, it's my intention to finish the job. We'll get there when we can.
Very good. Doug, we've reached the end of our time here today. You and I could continue to speak for a number of hours, I'm certain. So if you would, just wrap up and give us a closing statement about your candidacy for Auditor of Accounts.
Well, as I said at the outset, I enjoy the work. People can look on the website and see the work we've done over the last 7.5 years. It's all there. I'm proud of it. We have a lot of work in process that I'm looking forward to. So let's just keep working. Have fun.
My thanks to Doug Hoffer for joining us here today on our Election Candidate Forum, part of our coverage of Election 2020. A reminder that early voting has already begun here in our great state of Vermont. Check your mailbox for your ballot and complete and mail the ballot, or head to the polls in person on Tuesday, November 3rd. And then join us for complete election results beginning at 7 p.m. here on Town Meeting Television. For all of us at TMT, I'm Matt Kelly. Thank you for watching.